What if the end of the Cold War, wasn't just some victory lap? Like, what if it was a genuine shot at lasting peace? What if instead of, one superpower rising and the other one kind of falls, we'd gone for, I don't know, like cooperation, mutual benefit, that kind of thing?
A real turning point.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what we're digging into today, right? Those big decisions that got made right after the Soviet Union collapsed and how they, I guess you could say they kind of shaped how the US and Russia, deal with each other, good or bad. And, well, we've got an expert with us, someone who knows about global economics and who was actually advising countries during that whole crazy time.
Yeah, it was a time of, well, huge hope, obviously, but also a ton of uncertainty. The whole world was basically getting remade, and the choices they made then, I mean, they're still echoing today. It's kind of wild.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock back to like the early 90s, the Soviet Union's falling apart, Gorbachev's doing his whole perestroika thing, all these reforms, and bam, the Cold War's over. It feels like this totally unique moment to rewrite the rules, like globally.
Oh, absolutely. The potential was there to, like, I don't know, make a new playbook, ditch that Cold War zero-sum game and go for something more like collaborative to tackle those big global issues everyone was worried about.
And that's where Jeffrey Sachs pops up, right? He's advising both Poland and Russia, like trying to get them steady on their feet economically. And he wasn't just some professor, right? He was on the ground, in the thick of things, working right alongside governments.
Exactly. Sachs had this really unique perspective. I mean, he really gets economics, obviously. And he believes that stable economies equal peace. He saw all the mess in those former Soviet countries not just as like an economic crisis, but as a potential security threat, like a powder keg.
So he cooks up this grand bargain idea,
Yeah.
basically a huge aid package from the West to help prop up those struggling countries. It sounds like a pretty momentous idea. Was it just about money, or was there a deeper strategy going on there?
It was way more than just a handout, that's for sure. Sachs had this whole vision, right? A complete plan to help Russia shift to a market economy, get their currency stable, and build a safety net for their people, so they weren't just left out in the cold. He even compared it to what happened after World War I, how punishing Germany economically just led to more extremism and, well, another war eventually. Sachs wanted to learn from those mistakes, not repeat them.
Seems like he was going for a really proactive peace-building approach, using economic tools to prevent future conflicts. Pretty forward-thinking.
Oh, yeah. He truly believed that investing in Russia's economic recovery wasn't just like some nice gesture, it was strategically vital. A stable and prosperous Russia, integrated with the global economy, that would be a far less dangerous neighbor than one that was just collapsing in on itself.
Makes sense. So what happened? Did the West jump on board with this grand bargain?
Well, not exactly. Sachs ran into a wall, especially with the United States.
No.
They did give some aid, sure, but it was nowhere near what he and others thought was needed for Russia to actually make a successful transition.
Why was that? Was it just a matter of cost, or were there other things going on behind the scenes?
It's complicated, a lot of factors, but a big one was a shift in how the US was looking at foreign policy. The Soviet Union was gone, and a new way of thinking started taking over, one that was all about American dominance, not so much global cooperation.
So instead of seeing this as a chance to build a more peaceful world, together, The U.S. saw it as a chance to cement its position as the top dog, the only superpower left standing.
Yeah, that's one way to see it. Some folks were arguing that the U.S. was wary of a resurgent Russia, even if it was democratic, challenging their position globally. They saw helping Russia recover as potentially boosting a future rival. Kind of a cynical view.
It does sound pretty cynical, especially after Russia had taken those huge steps to end the Cold War. Did anyone push back against that way of thinking?
Oh, Sachs did, for sure. He argued passionately that this whole focus on dominance was short-sighted, even dangerous. He warned that ignoring Russia's economic needs would just brew resentment, instability, and ultimately, undermine global security. He'd seen it firsthand in Poland how effective Western aid could be in fostering economic growth and democratic reforms. He believed the same approach could work in Russia, but, well, they mostly ignored his warnings.
So you've got this real clash of visions, right? Sachs pushing for a more cooperative, multilateral approach, and some in the U.S. pushing for a unipolar world, America calling all the shots.
Yeah, and that clash had huge consequences, not just for Russia, but for the entire global order.
Yeah.
That decision to prioritize dominance over cooperation, well, it cast a long shadow, setting the stage for a lot of the tensions and conflicts we see playing out today.
Wow. So while Sachs is out there fighting for this grand bargain, trying to get Russia back on its feet, what's happening on the ground there? Are things really as bad as he was predicting?
Sadly, yeah. Russia's economy just went into a free fall. Hyperinflation wiped out people's savings, essential goods were hard to come by, and crime was through the roof. It was a brutal time for millions of Russians.
This is all sounding pretty grim. I'm curious to hear more about how this economic collapse played out and how Sachs responded to it.
It really showed you what happens, when a bad economy and political instability get together. People were losing faith in everything, the system, their leaders, the whole idea of a better future.
So Russia's going through all this. Did Sachs just throw in the towel? It sounds like no one was listening to him anyway.
No, not at all. He kept pushing for a more, I guess you'd say, compassionate and strategic approach. He was warning everyone that what the West was doing was just gonna isolate Russia, make them resentful. He understood, right, that a country that feels hurt and humiliated, well, they're more likely to lash out, try to get their power back in other ways. Maybe not so peaceful ways.
And did anyone take those warnings seriously? Did anyone in power actually listen to what he was saying?
Not really, not enough anyway. It's sad. Sachs was trying to get them to change course, but it was like his voice was drowned out by all the people who wanted to be tougher on Russia, even punish them.
So while the chance for economic cooperation was slipping away, was the U.S. doing other things that might have made things worse with Russia?
Yeah, and this is where things get, well, even more worrying. Remember those promises they made to Gorbachev when Germany was reunifying? They said NATO wouldn't expand eastward, right? Well, those promises kind of went out the window in the 90s when NATO started letting in those former Soviet bloc countries.
That seems like a pretty big betrayal, especially given how sensitive Russia is about its history and its security.
It was. And Sachs was one of the people raising the alarm bells. He was saying that NATO expansion would look like a direct threat to Russia, like they were trying to box them in.
Yeah.
And that, of course, would just make relations worse and increase military tensions.
So on the one hand, you've got the U.S. saying no to Sachs's plan for economic cooperation, and on the other hand, they're doing things that are basically poking the bear, antagonizing Russia. It's almost like they were trying to provoke a reaction.
Well, it's complicated. There were different opinions inside the US government back then, for sure, but the main thinking seemed to be that Russia was a fading power and they could just ignore their concerns.
Sounds like a pretty big miscalculation. Did anyone see what the long-term consequences of these decisions would be?
Sachs did, for sure. He kept saying that pushing Russia into a corner would just backfire, create an enemy that's even more volatile and unpredictable. He thought that instead of trying to contain or isolate Russia, the US should have been trying to bring them into the global community, give them a reason to play by the rules.
So while Sachs is out there trying to build bridges, other people are busy digging trenches. This whole clash of worldviews is fascinating and honestly a little terrifying.
Mm.
But what about Sachs himself? How did he react as everyone ignored his warnings and his hope for a more peaceful world just seemed to disappear?
He got more and more disillusioned. He watched as the West blew this historic chance to build a lasting peace. He knew what conflict really meant, the human cost, and he understood how fragile peace really is. To see all that hard work to end the Cold War get thrown away by short-sighted policies, well, it was really disheartening.
I can only imagine how frustrating that must have been. To see a way to a better future but not be able to convince anyone to take it. But it's not just about Sachs's feelings, is it? These decisions had real consequences in the world, right?
Oh, absolutely. Pushing Russia to the sidelines economically and politically, well, it created this breeding ground for resentment and nationalism.
Yeah.
It also emboldened the people who wanted to make Russia great again through military power and taking back territory.
So the seeds of the conflict we see today were planted way back then in those decisions made in the early 90s.
Yeah, the choices they made then, they had a huge impact on where both Russia and the world ended up. They missed this chance for a real partnership, one based on mutual respect and cooperation, and that led down a road of tension and mistrust.
This has given me a lot to think about. We started out talking about missed chances for peace, and now it feels like we're digging into the roots of a conflict that's happening right now. What happened next? Did the U.S. just keep going down this road of confrontation, or did anyone try to change things?
Yeah, it's tough to look back now and not see all those early decisions as like missed opportunities. But I don't know, was there any point where things could have gone differently? Or were we always heading for this, this clash? Oh, there were definitely moments where, they could have taken a different path. But it's like those moments got lost in all the talk about Russia being the loser, the enemy, instead of a possible partner.
So instead of seeing the end of the Cold War as a chance to, reset things,
Mm-hmm.
the U.S. just stuck with this idea of being the only superpower, calling all the shots.
Yeah, and that way of thinking, it kind of shaped a lot of their policies over the next few decades. Expanding NATO, getting involved in Kosovo, Iraq, all these things where the U.S. was flexing its muscle militarily and politically, and often without really caring about what Russia thought or what they wanted.
And how did Russia react to all this? Did they just, I don't know, sit back and accept being pushed around?
Not quite. As their economy got better and they rebuilt their military, Russia started to get more assertive, started pushing back against what they saw as the West, like encroaching on their turf. You saw diplomatic protests, military exercises, and they started supporting regimes that were against the U.S.
So all that resentment from the economic collapse, it never really went away. It just kept growing until it turned into this more aggressive stance.
Exactly. And the fact that there was no real dialogue, no one willing to listen to Russia's complaints, their worries about security, well, it just made things worse. The two sides were talking, but not really listening, each one thinking the other was out to get them.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah.
The U.S. treated Russia like an enemy, and Russia, feeling trapped and disrespected, well, they started acting like one.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the consequences of all that, well, we're seeing them play out today. The war in Ukraine, it's a tragic end to decades of missed chances and growing tension.
It really makes you think, right? History isn't just something that happens, it's shaped by choices, by decisions made by people and countries. And sometimes those decisions, even when they think they're doing the right thing or maybe the wrong thing, they can have consequences that no one saw coming. Consequences that echo through time.
Definitely. And it shows how important it is to understand history, not just as dates and facts, but as a way to understand what's happening now and to, try to create a better future.
It's like a reminder to be more aware of the choices we make, both as individuals and as as a global community.
Yeah.
To remember that there's always more than one way forward, and to think about the consequences of what we do, not just for now, but for the future.
And to remember that real peace isn't just about, not fighting. It's about justice, fairness, and respecting each other. It's something you have to work at, a commitment to talking and understanding and being willing to compromise.
This has really been an eye-opening conversation. We started by talking about a chance for peace that got missed, and now we've ended up exploring the roots of a conflict that's very real and happening right now. It's a reminder that the choices we make today, the paths we choose, they're going to shape the world we live in tomorrow.
And it challenges each of us to, I don't know, to try to create a future where we work together instead of fighting, where we talk instead of being suspicious, and where peace isn't just some dream, but something we can all experience.
I think that's a great place to leave it. And if you're looking for some music to, reflect on all this, I'd suggest Bay by Black Obelisk. It kind of captures how heavy these historical choices are and that desire for a world that's more peaceful.